In a prosperous kingdom, King Adebayo prays desperately to the gods for an heir. But after years of marriage, he has no son. Just when hope seems lost, a mysterious woman appears, revealing herself as the Serpent Queen. She promises him a son, but with a powerful secret. This child will not be like any other, a child of both man and serpent, destined to rule. In a prosperous kingdom nestled deep within the heart of Nigeria, there ruled a wise and powerful king named Adebayo. His kingdom was one of the wealthiest in the land, and his people loved him for his fairness and strength. However, despite his many qualities, there was one thing that weighed heavily on the king's heart. He had no children. Adebayo had married many wives over the years, each of noble birth and great beauty, but none had borne him a son. The king's longing for an heir grew with every passing day. He feared that without a son to take the throne, the future of his kingdom would be uncertain. As time went on, the elders of the kingdom began to murmur among themselves. They spoke of the royal family's future, for without a male heir, the throne would be left without a ruler. Rumors spread through the land that the king's bloodline might be at risk, and fear began to take root in the hearts of the people. Adebayo could feel the weight of this uncertainty pressing down on him. He knew that one day the kingdom would need a strong leader to protect and guide it. Desperate to change his fate, Adebayo sought the guidance of the gods. He prayed tirelessly to Olokun, the goddess of fertility and wealth, offering her the finest treasures in the land. He sacrificed precious gold, fine fabrics, and the most beautiful animals from his royal stables, hoping that the gods would grant him the child he so desperately desired. Yet, despite his many sacrifices, no divine answer came. Night after night, Adebayo would sit alone in his grand palace, staring out over the vast kingdom he had built. His heart ached as he thought of his people and the legacy he would leave behind. One evening, as the moonlight bathed the palace in a soft, ethereal glow, a figure appeared before him. She was a woman of extraordinary beauty, her skin a shade of dark velvet, and her eyes sparkled with a knowing light. She wore a gown of woven leaves and golden beads, and her presence filled the room with an unspoken power. Adebayo's heart skipped a beat as she stepped into his chamber. Without speaking a word, the woman raised her hand, and the room seemed to vibrate with an energy Adebayo had never known. Oined, she introduced herself as, revealing that she was no ordinary woman, but a serpent queen, a goddess capable of granting his deepest wish. As soon as the serpent queen introduced herself, Adebayo felt a mix of awe and uncertainty. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and the air around him felt charged. She spoke of the God's will, explaining that she had come in answer to his prayers. Adebayo listened intently, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hardly believe that a goddess had appeared before him, but the power emanating from her was undeniable. The serpent queen, Oinade, spoke with calm authority, yet her voice carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. She told Adebayo that she could grant him a son, one who would carry the strength and wisdom of both man and serpent. But she also warned him that the boy would be no ordinary child. He would possess powers beyond human understanding, and his destiny would be entwined with both the land and the supernatural forces of the world. The Sultan listened closely, understanding that this child would not only be his heir, but also someone who would shape the future of the kingdom in ways that no one could foresee. The Serpent Queen's words were clear. She would grant him this miracle, but Adebayo must promise to keep the child's true nature a secret, for the world was not yet ready to accept a ruler born of both man and serpent. The power the boy would hold could bring both great prosperity and unimaginable fear. The king's promise was unwavering. He would raise the child in secrecy and protect him from those who would seek to harm or exploit his powers. With a final wave of her hand, Oyinade disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a strange and silent stillness in the room. Moments later, a strange glow appeared before Adebayo, and the air seemed to shimmer. He could hardly comprehend what he was witnessing when the light dissipated, revealing a child, an infant with dark brown skin, glowing emerald green eyes, and a quiet power that radiated from him even in his infancy. Adebayo's heart swelled with joy and awe as he gazed down at his son. The child, whom Adebayo named Olamide, meaning "my wealth has come," was no ordinary baby. Though he had the features of a human, there was something extraordinary about him. Adebayo knew that his life had changed forever. He held his son in his arms, promising to raise him with love, but also to protect his secret. The boy would grow in the palace, hidden from the eyes of the kingdom until the time was right for the world to know the truth of his lineage. As the days passed, Olamide grew at an astonishing rate. He learned to speak at a tender age, his mind sharp and full of wonder. But the power he possessed began to show itself in subtle ways. Flowers bloomed at his touch, and animals followed him wherever he went. Though Adebayo marveled at his son's abilities, he knew that the child's true potential was something that would have to remain hidden. For now, as the years passed, Olamide grew at an astonishing rate. His mind was sharp, and his understanding of the world around him surpassed that of children his age. By the age of 7, Olamide had mastered the royal scrolls and the ancient teachings of the kingdom. His ability to speak multiple languages and understand complex royal affairs amazed the trusted servants who cared for him, though they dared not ask questions. It was clear to Adebayo that the boy was no ordinary child. He was a blessing, a gift from the gods. But what struck Adebayo most were Olamide's abilities. At a young age, he showed signs of supernatural powers. The first time Adebayo truly realized the extent of his son's powers was when the royal gardens had been stricken with a terrible drought. The crops withered, the flowers faded, and the once lush greenery turned brown and dry. The people of the kingdom prayed for rain, but nothing came. One morning, as Adebayo walked through the royal gardens, he found Olamide standing alone by a dried-up tree. The boy's eyes, once a soft green, now glowed a vibrant emerald. He reached out his hand and placed it gently on the barren tree. Within moments, the ground trembled and a soft rain began to fall. It wasn't a storm, but a gentle rainfall that soaked the parched land. The leaves of the tree turned green, and the flowers bloomed once again. The kingdom's drought was over, and the people marveled at the sight. Adebayo watched from a distance, his heart swelling with both awe and fear. He knew this was no ordinary feat. Olamide's connection to the natural world was unlike anything he had ever seen. His powers were linked not only to the land, but to the spirits of nature itself. The boy could command the elements, call upon the wind, and bring life to the dying earth. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. Animals, once wild and elusive, followed Olamide wherever he went. Birds would sing from the trees as he passed, and even the fiercest lions in the royal zoo would sit calmly in his presence. He had a quiet way with creatures. Birds perched on his shoulders, while wolves would follow him through the palace grounds as though they were his loyal guardians. Yet, despite these remarkable abilities, Adebayo kept Olamide hidden from the kingdom. The boy's powers, the wondrous, were dangerous. The people who had heard rumors of the boy's gifts would fear him if they knew the truth. The king often wrestled with the decision to reveal Olamide to the world. On one hand, he was a miraculous child, a gift from the gods, a true heir to the throne. On the other hand, his powers made him different, too different. One evening, as Adebayo sat in his chamber, watching his son play in the palace garden, he knew the day would come when Olamide's powers could no longer be hidden. The boy's destiny had already begun to unfold, and it was only a matter of time before the world would know who he truly was. As the years went on, Olamide's power only grew stronger. By the time he reached his 16th year, he was no longer the innocent child who had been raised in secret. His strength was unparalleled, and his abilities had become the subject of much speculation among the royal courts. Whispers about the mysterious child who could command the elements and speak to animals had spread throughout the kingdom. Some believed him to be a gift from the gods, while others feared he was cursed, a child born of magic and serpent blood. Adebayo knew the time had come. He could no longer keep Olamide hidden from the world. His son had grown into a man, and it was time for him to step into his rightful place as heir to the throne. The kingdom, though prosperous under Adebayo's rule, needed the strength of its next leader. The people could no longer remain in the dark about their future king. A grand feast was prepared, and invitations were sent to all the noble families and royal advisors. The palace was decorated with the finest golden ornaments, and the great hall was filled with the sound of music and laughter. The air was filled with excitement as everyone gathered to witness the announcement of the new heir. But amidst the festivities, there was an air of uncertainty. There were murmurs of fear and curiosity. Who would the new heir be? And what of the strange rumors surrounding the royal family's child? The night of the feast arrived, and Olamide stood before the gathered guests, dressed in royal attire, a simple robe adorned with intricate beadwork and a sash of gold. His dark brown eyes were calm but piercing, and his presence commanded immediate attention. He was tall, with a muscular build, and his movements were graceful yet powerful. Despite his youth, Olamide carried himself with the confidence of a king, though there was an air of quiet humility about him. As he stepped forward, the room fell silent. The noblemen and women, the royal advisors, and the guests who had gathered in the grand hall all looked upon him with a mix of awe and apprehension. It was in this moment that the first sign of Olamide's true nature appeared. The earth beneath their feet trembled. At first, the movement was barely perceptible, but it soon grew stronger. The walls of the palace seemed to hum with energy, and a mighty serpent appeared in the doorway, its emerald scales shimmering under the candlelight. The room erupted in chaos, and many of the guests screamed in fear. The serpent slithered into the hall, its eyes glowing like two fiery orbs, and as it moved, it seemed to radiate an overwhelming power. Olamide raised his hand, and the serpent stopped, coiling around his body as though it recognized him as its master. The truth had been revealed. Olamide was not just the king's son, he was the son of Oened, the serpent queen. He had been born of both man and serpent, a child of divine power. The people of the kingdom stood frozen, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Some feared the power that Olamide now controlled, while others began to understand that he was the destined ruler of the land. Olamide stood tall and steady, his eyes meeting those of the people. He had no fear, for he knew this day would come. The time had arrived for him to claim his rightful place as Adebayo's heir, and his journey as a ruler was just beginning. The serpent, which had been the symbol of his birth, now served as a reminder of the extraordinary future that lay ahead. Adebayo, standing beside his son, raised his hand and declared, "This is my son, the true heir to the throne. He is born of both man and serpent, and his destiny is to rule this kingdom with wisdom and strength." As the truth about Olamide's origins spread through the kingdom, the people's reactions were mixed. Some believed he was a divine being, a son of both man and serpent, sent to bring greatness to the kingdom. Others feared him, whispering that his supernatural powers were too dangerous to be trusted. Yet, Olamide stood firm, unshaken by the doubts of the world. He had been raised to lead, and now the time had come to show the world his true strength. Days turned into weeks as Olamide began to take charge of the kingdom. He walked among his people, observing their lives and listening to their concerns. As the people saw his genuine desire to understand their needs, their fears began to fade. He had a natural charisma, and though his power was beyond what anyone could imagine, he ruled with a gentle hand. Olamide didn't use his powers to intimidate. He used them to heal, to restore balance, and to protect. His connection to nature was like no other. He would walk into the royal gardens and the flowers would bloom in his presence. He could command the rain to fall during times of drought and call upon the winds to calm the storm. He knew the language of animals and could communicate with them effortlessly. The people began to see him not just as their king, but as a protector of the land and its creatures. But not all were pleased with Olamide's rise to power. There were those who feared his strength and the strange abilities he possessed. A group of jealous noblemen and rival kings began to conspire against him. They saw him as a threat to their own rule and sought to overthrow him. They plotted to take the throne by force, believing that a king born of serpent blood could never be trusted. Olamide, however, was prepared for the challenges that lay ahead with the wisdom he had inherited from his divine mother and the strength passed down from his human father. He was not easily defeated. He met with the rival kingdoms in peaceful negotiations, using his intellect to outwit those who sought to challenge his reign. But when diplomacy failed, Olamide knew it was time to demonstrate the true extent of his power. As the years passed, Olamide faced many challenges. There were rival kingdoms that sought to test his strength, and there were those within his own kingdom who resented his serpent blood. However, Olamide remained steadfast in his leadership, determined to bring peace and prosperity to his people. His reign was marked by both wisdom and strength, and though his powers were extraordinary, he never ruled with fear. Instead, he ruled with understanding and compassion, seeking to heal the land and its people. One of the greatest challenges Olamide faced came when a neighboring kingdom, envious of his power, launched an attack on his borders. The enemy king, believing that Olamide's abilities were a threat, sent his armies to seize the land. Olamide, knowing that violence would not solve anything, called upon the spirits of nature to help protect his people. He summoned a great serpent, and with its aid, he drove the invaders away without shedding a single drop of blood. The rival army fled, terrified by the power of the Serpent King and his mystical forces. Despite this victory, Olamide knew that true peace could only be achieved through understanding. He sent emissaries to the neighboring kingdom, offering peace and proposing a treaty. Over time, he forged alliances with neighboring kingdoms, bringing stability to the region. His powers were no longer seen as a threat, but as a blessing, and his wisdom earned him the respect of rulers far and wide. Yet, not all were pleased with his approach. Some of his own people believed that he was too soft, that he relied too much on his powers and not enough on traditional rule. They feared that his strange powers would one day spiral out of control, bringing disaster instead of peace. Olamide listened to their concerns, but he knew that his path was not one of violence or domination. It was a path of balance, peace, and understanding. As Olamide's reign continued, the kingdom flourished under his leadership. His wisdom became renowned, and his abilities to command nature and heal the land were celebrated throughout the region. Olamide was not just a king, he was a symbol of harmony between the natural world and humanity. The people loved him for the way he ruled with a gentle hand and strong heart, always putting the needs of his kingdom before his own desires. Though his power was vast, Olamide never grew arrogant. He remained grounded in his purpose to protect the kingdom and ensure that his people lived in peace. He often sought guidance from the spirits of the land and from his mother, Oinadi, who had always watched over him. She remained a constant presence, advising him when needed. But Olamide had grown into a leader who was capable of making his own decisions. The years of prosperity passed, and as Olamide grew older, he began to think about the future of his kingdom. He knew that his reign would one day come to an end, and he wanted to ensure that his legacy would live on. He began to prepare his son, the next heir, for the throne. He trained him in the ways of governance, diplomacy, and the deeper connection to nature that he had inherited from his mother. One day, as he sat in the royal garden, surrounded by the animals that had always been his companions, Olamide realized that his life's work had come full circle. He had bridged the gap between the human world and the natural world, bringing balance to both. The kingdom, once in turmoil, was now a place of peace and prosperity. The legacy of Olamide, the Serpent King, would live on for generations, passed down through his children and their children until the end of time. As Olamide grew older, he began to contemplate his legacy. He had ruled the kingdom for many years, bringing peace and prosperity, and now it was time for the next generation to take the reins. His son, a young boy full of promise, had been groomed to inherit the throne. Olamide saw in him the same wisdom and strength that he had once possessed, and he knew that the kingdom would continue to thrive under his rule. But before he passed the crown to his son, Olamide gathered his people one last time in the grand hall. He wanted to share the wisdom he had gained over his years of leadership and to remind them of the values that had made his reign so successful. Standing before the kingdom's leaders, Olamide spoke of the importance of balance. the balance between man and nature, between power and humility, between strength and compassion. He urged the people to continue living in harmony with the land, to protect the animals, the forests, and the rivers, for they were all part of the same world. As he passed the crown to his son, Olamide felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had fulfilled his destiny. His legacy would continue through his son, and his teachings would be passed down for generations to come. The people of the kingdom had learned that true leadership was not about power or fear, but about serving the people and protecting the land. The story of Olamide, the serpent king, would be told for centuries, a legend of a ruler who bridged the gap between the supernatural and the human world, and who led his kingdom with wisdom, compassion, and strength. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update on our latest stories.